Thank you so much, Mrs. Smith, for sharing all of that and giving us a glimpse into the bigger part of your story, and from past right up to as recent as these latest cases.
What age do you think is the best age to talk about this issue, especially if, you're going into a school?
First of all, I think you need to start in your home when the kids are very young. I would say around grade 5, grade 6. And I would like to see it in the schools at grade 5 and grade 6, because the average age of entry into the sex trade in Canada is 12 years old. 12 years old. And what is so good about it in a school, when you go to a school like grade 8 to 12, you not only have to talk about present day human trafficking, but on my grade 8 to 12, we talk about the history, the proud history Canada has to combat human trafficking. Did you know that in the latter 1700s, it was Lord Simcoe that actually passed the first anti-trafficking law? And if you remember, in the United States, they were selling blacks all the time. Black people were on the market, and they brought them to Canada. And there was a very courageous woman, Chloe, and this is what I tell the kids, and it's in the curriculum. She spoke out and she said, "You can't sell me, I'm a person." And Lord Simcoe heard her cries. And when you tell this to the kids get all excited. And then we talk about, how because of that law, blacks they couldn't buy slaves here in Canada, black slaves. So then we produced the Underground Railway, and Martin Luther King paid the greatest compliment to Canada, calling Canada the North Star, and the kids just bloom with pride. And then I talk about the modern day slave trade, and we bring them to the real stuff. And then we go through tips for students, what to look for, tips for parents, how the predators work. And so we actually teach them, we empower them with knowledge. I have found that a little bit of knowledge prevents human trafficking from happening.
My question, well, the first one, is about this notion of sex workers choosing to do that line of work and seeing it as a way of empowerment.
What I do is I've worked with 18 years and under, because but the Charter of Rights, once they're 18 years old, people can choose to do anything they want. And so there's no laws that would prohibit them from doing that. Our first responsibility is to keep our youth safe. Human trafficking is the most egregious part of sex exploitation. On the other side, I had a nurse who was tired, she told me, of emptying bedpans and giving needles and picking up puke, she said. This is her words. And she went to Edmonton and she put out her shingle. And she came back, she was furious. I was supposed to get after all these men. She had been beaten, she had all bad things happen to her. And yet she came to see me to get after the Johns. And I said to her, you need to work with women making choices like you just made. So here's a grown woman who made the decision to sell herself for sex. I think she watched the movie Pretty Woman or something and thought it was something much different than what it really was. But what I center my work on is the young. They pick on underage, beautiful girls. And for the most part, because they bring the most money, they're easy to scare. They're easy to manipulate. They don't think they are, but they are. They're not mature enough because they're just kids.
Almost discouraging, disheartening to hear in your story about just the outright opposition and just how much you had to break through to do that bit of good that you were trying to do. So how do you find yourself from not becoming very cynical about our current governments and this inability to get good done?
Well, Tori, I learned a big lesson myself. Everybody would laugh at me. There's no human trafficking. And I'd go back to my office and I would just say, what am I doing here? There's so many deadheads. And that's not a very good Christian attitude, is it? But this is what God taught me that was so important. During the testimony, like I brought in a lot of the girls who had been trafficked. And some of it's in camera because they didn't want, there were no laws to protect them. They had to be very careful. But as they did their testimony, I looked across the table and I saw tears come down the faces of people who used to laugh at me or, make you feel as if you didn't know anything, the type. And God really taught me, they just didn't know.
Yeah, what happens to an organization, like beyond the first leader, or who steps up, and are there people who are like rising up or like stepping up?
Well, you are. Yeah. When you talk about people, you're talking about youth. And when you look at me, there has to be succession someday. I have an expiry date. I have a shelf life. You should step up. Everybody should step up. You see, it's not just one person or somebody who has a name or not a name. It's God-fearing, wonderful people like yourselves. And it's the smallest thing can make a big difference. You're very important. You can do things like take the education program and make presentations in schools. You can pray. You can take the Bible study and teach your own church about, take a small step at a time. And once you're willing, God opens the doors like this.
We would love it if you were able to stay with us right now as we just close in prayer so that we can pray over you and your work.
Let's pray together. Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much that you are the God that cares about each and every one of us, and that there's never a moment where you walk away from any one of us. And we think about all of the girls and the boys across our country right now who are enslaved and held against their will. God, I know that you see them and you know their pain. You enter into it with them. And God, I just pray for those of us who are hearing about this, that you would give us the courage that we need to step out in whatever it is that you're calling us to. We might not all be lawmakers like Mrs. Smith was, but God, in our own way, help us to know how you want us to contribute, help us to be obedient to you, and help us to have courage and just step out. We thank you for Mrs. Smith's time tonight and all the ways that you have used her in this country to put an end to this injustice. And I pray that you would continue to bless her and her foundation as they just bring an end to injustice and human trafficking and sexual slavery in our country. Thank you for guiding her steps and continue to do so in your way.
Well, it's been such an honor meeting you all, and please keep in touch, and look forward to talking with you over the internet, and God bless you in your work.